All right. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. Um, yeah, I'll drive a little bit. Joanna had a conflict for this meeting, so she couldn't make it. I'm sure she'll be back next month. So if you've looked at the agenda, there's a couple of really interesting items. For those of you who weren't here last year, we had a great meeting discussing the Reimagine uh, process that was then underway, and then that got kind of shelved for a while for a variety of reasons, obviously COVID and getting a new general manager and so on. Frankly, I'm thrilled that the board has brought back the Reimagine process. Of course, we might be reimagining Reimagine at this point a little bit, given all that's happened in the last 6 months. So it'll be actually kind of fascinating to find out where that is. And hopefully you can all hang around, all of you on the committee, hang around till the end, because we want to spend at least a few minutes discussing some committee items about meetings and future agenda items and so on, to make sure we're all on track, which is, a lot easier to do when we meet in person, and frankly, a lot harder to do when we see each other in these stupid rectangles. And we don't really get a chance to meet each other and chat and, just talk about how things are going. So we're going to try to do a little bit of that at the end. But let's get started, because there's a lot on the agenda, and I really am thrilled that we've got the Reimagine team back. And I will let them introduce themselves, because they'll do a much better job of it than I will. Julie, are you going to kick it off?
Bill's going to start us off here, and then
Okay.
I was going to help with the presentation.
Hi, I'm Bill Soroy. Those of you who haven't met me, I'm the Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Communities in the Planning Department at RTD. So I know many of you were participated in some of the discussions we had last year on Reimagine. I think we've been to this group a few times over the course of the past year and a half. What we're going to talk about today is kind of as Matt said, we're restarting Reimagine. We put it on pause last August, kind of as a result of a few things. One, dealing with the pandemic and some of the challenges that we were facing and uncertainty. And the other big one was we were hiring a general manager, who now we have. And I assume you guys have all met Deborah. And so she's been great, and she's been very engaged in Reimagine, which we're really excited about. But with that, I will turn it over to Julie and Holly to introduce themselves and then go forward with our presentation.
Okay. Holly, you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, thanks for having us today. My name is Holly Buck. I'm with Felsberg, Holt, and Illevig, and I'm the project manager for Reimagine. And I'll be here to help answer questions if there are any. I'm mainly just hear from you and get feedback from you. But Julie's going to run the show.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm Julie Skeen. I'm with CIG, and I'm Holly's partner in crime on the outreach side. So that's my focus on Reimagine RTD. And we're thrilled to be back. I mean, I think we met with you guys quite a bit over the last year. We're looking to do that again, because we are now revamping and starting this process over. So have a brief presentation, just a couple slides to kind of orient us. I know some of you guys have been with us along this journey. Some of you are just getting up to speed. I appreciate Roger sent out the website link. Great background information on that. And so definitely let us know if you have questions. But really, we are here for you to work. We are here because we have some questions and we have some thoughts, and we would love inputs from you guys. So a couple slides to kind of get us organized, and then we'll jump into the discussion. So let me share my screen here. All right. Hopefully everybody can see this. Is that looking good? Okay. So Reimagine RTD. So this is what we're going to talk about over the next hour or so, or a little less. So just recap kind of where are we on Reimagine, and then really start jumping into the mobility plan for the future. This is something that we've always talked that we were going to get into, and we can finally sink our teeth into it. So we're really pretty excited. We've got some guiding principles we'd like to talk to you about, and then we'll give you an update on sort of next steps and public engagement. So this is a small group. Feel free to put stuff in chat. Holly and Bill help me keep an eye on that. Feel free to just unmute yourself and ask questions. This is a small group, so we can keep it very informal. So Reimagine RTD. So for those of you, you've seen this slide before, for those of you who have been with us on this journey, there's two major components of the Reimagine RTD project. So one was our major focus last year, and that was a systems optimization plan. So it's really looking to redesign RTD's overall service to sort of balance, the needs from a mobility perspective, as well as to match those to our financial limitations. So we started this process, we had to refocus ourselves a little bit halfway through. To Matt's point, obviously the pandemic severely changed to sort of the environment that we were working in and caused a lot of impacts to the system. So we sort of shifted gears a little bit through the SOP to start supporting more of the short term. And a lot of those ideas were adopted into the January 2020 Run Board. But what I'd like to do is put a pin in the SOP discussion, because we are doing some work in the back end to kind of figure out next steps and how to get people engaged in that, but we're not quite ready to have that discussion. So with your permission, we would love to come back and have a more detailed discussion about the SOP specifically, maybe at your next meeting or whatever works for your schedule. So I wanted to let you know there's still some work on that one, but love to come back and talk to you about it. But what we want to focus on today is the mobility plan for the future. So that's the longer term piece. So that's 2030, 2050. Where is RTD going and how do we address these long-term needs? So that's what going to be a little bit more of our focus today. As Bill mentioned, we did pause back in August. It just, with everything going on with the pandemic and the new general manager, there just was too much going on to have enough capacity to really continue working this. So we're on pause from August until about February of this year. So we're just getting restarted, again, with this focus, at least initially, on the mobility plan for the future. So the mobility plan for the future, this is a piece we've been talking about for a while. We're starting to get kind of our arms around the next steps for it. We're very excited. So what are we trying to accomplish? This is about ongoing dialogue, really building on the community outreach we did last year. We're going to be looking longer term, 2030, 2050, looking at travel patterns and demands. This is where we get to start talking a little bit more about technologies, because there's a lot of new technologies out there that might actually provide options in terms of providing service. So this is where we get to start factoring that in. And then we're obviously got to look at the finances, because whatever we put service on the ground obviously has to link to how much revenue we have coming in. So they'll continue evaluation of that. And really coming down to what we want this plan at the end of the day to provide specific strategies and timeframes for actual to actually make sure that we're putting things in the ground now, or we're actually starting to act on these recommendations now, so that they'll be in place by the time that we have these needs. And so it's really meant to be a policy document with very specific strategies and tactics. My screen just stuck on me. Hang on a second. Oh, there we go. So, whoa, there we go. Okay. So this is a great graph. I love this graphic because it kind of shows all the different components of the mobility plan for the future. So right now we are going to talk a little bit about these guiding principles. That's where we're going to start for now. And you'll see that this engagement piece, as it's been through the last year, is going to flow through the entire project. So there's going to be continuous loops in terms of engagement and asking for feedback. And then here's the technical work that's going on. So this is a large part of Holly and Brian Welch's focus. Let's look at the market and travel demand analysis. Let's continue looking at our financial situation to make sure we're being sustainable, sort of resulting in this down here, developing these strategies to make sure that we're serving the future travel demand market and needs. And so you'll see some of the things here that we'll be getting into a lot more detail related to workforce or fleet electrification, first mile, last mile. So a lot of these topics and ideas we've been discussing them as part of the SOP, and now we get to take a little bit more focus on some of these issues to make sure that we're identifying strategies that will help us address these needs. So guiding principles. We started at the beginning when we restated the survey, or we restarted the project in February. We started thinking, okay, well, we need to do this mobility plan for the future. We've got to be looking forward. So we need a framework. We need a set of values. We need some statements that'll help guide us at a very, very high level. So that's what these initial guiding principles are. They're intended to be a foundation for decisions that RTD is going to make about service delivery. So they're very, very high level. So once we start with these guiding principles, then you will see there's a process we're going to go through to identify objectives and strategies and outcomes for these. So I'll show you in this next slide kind of how that works. So we haven't shown you the guiding principles yet. That's coming, I promise. But you'll see. So we have a guiding principle. So looking at example 1. So say we need to address equity and we need to improve mobility. So assuming those are our guiding principles, one of our objectives could be relating to increasing access for transportation, people that need it most. So a specific strategy associated with that could relate to ADA requirements and making sure all the bus stops are achieving ADA requirement standards. What is the time frame on that? That's pretty long term. Not that RTD is not committed to that, but there's a heck of a lot of bus stops out there that need to be addressed. Who's responsible? And what is the ultimate outcome? So these are just examples because we're just at the beginning of this process, but really wanted to give you a sense of how this process works. So once we've identified these value statements, then we start kind of digging into, well, what would it take to achieve that? And so these are just absolute, like I said, examples, but this shows you sort of the cadence of what we're trying to achieve and what will ultimately end up resulting in the document, the final document. So here are the guiding principles. So these are in the process of being approved by the RTD board. They have reviewed them. They're going back, they're providing comments. And on the 6th of April, we're going to go and recommend a formal action for adoption. So at this point, we are not, we haven't gotten a lot of comments from the board. We've been getting some pretty positive feedback. And again, these are meant to be pretty high level. So just very quickly, mobility, providing safe and reliable transportation, right? That's kind of why RTD exists. Equity. Let's talk about removing barriers. There could be lots of different types of barriers, but there are individuals that need this service that have challenges in accessing it. So what does that look like and how do we address that? Financial is always key. I mean, financial is super important because we've got to make sure that we're not, that we're managing how much service we can put based on how much revenue is coming into the system. Partnerships. We talked a lot about partnerships. We're going to continue talking about partnerships. This is a very exciting piece where how can we as RTD really look to join partnerships with private organizations or local jurisdictions to really identify opportunities to work together to address a lot of our needs. Workforce is its own issue. How do we foster a dynamic and diverse workforce? This particular, we'd love feedback on this one from you guys, especially because you're so close to RTD, but we're also just, going to do a pretty extensive outreach approach to the employees of RTD because we figure nobody understands what it's like to work at RTD, better than the people that are there. And they have so many great ideas. So we're going to be really mining the employees a lot for that. And then finally, sustainability. So making sure that we're providing sustainable mobility options to try to reduce, our overall environmental impact. So I'll stop there for a second. So, again, this is, that we've been kind of developing these more with the board level, but we're definitely interested in feedback. Just curious, how, what sort of reaction you guys have to these? How do you feel about these guiding principles? They're just that good, huh? I mean, they're meant to be very, very high level and they're meant to be sort of all encompassing. So
they seem very comprehensive to me.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, and I might add, I really value that you're asking the workforce. I'm a fellow government worker. I know RTD is kind of quasi-government, but it really is. Sometimes you feel like you're a government worker and everybody's asking everybody but you.
Exactly.
So it's really nice that you have that buy-in.
Great. Terrific.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think things do look well covered. I see a note in the chat from Joan about that. I'm especially delighted that of course, mobility is going to be in there, financial is going to be in there. I'm glad you've added partnerships and workforce and sustainability. Equity is, a huge issue that I think is going to take, of all of these, a lot of thought. Because, when you're picturing, you tend to put in our mind the idea of people who have various disabilities and so on. And that's certainly one part of equity. But another part of equity is people who have lower income and who have difficulty, for whatever reason, accessing the system, land use issues, and so on. So that's a really big one that I think is, yeah, you can define it in this sentence, but it's it's way more than that sentence, and it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out.
Absolutely. Great. Well, now
Hey,
that you
Julie,
please.
just
Yeah.
real quick, as the process moves on and
Mhm.
trade-offs are inevitable, do you see a kind of a ranking process among these guiding principles, or a weighting process trying to be achieved in this?
That's a great question, Ben, but not at the guiding principle level. We are not intending these to be comparative or competitive against each other. What you will see, and here I'll go back to the example to kind of show that, what we will see is that it is likely that as we move forward with that, there will be strategies that will apply to multiple guiding principles as we kind of move forward with that. So as we get into the details and the individual strategies, obviously, there are financial limitations, so there will be some trade-off discussions associated with that, but we're intending that the guiding principles are high enough together that we can develop strategies that can accomplish all of them.
Julie, how is the budgeting process going to work around development, implementation, all of that?
How the budgeting process relating to the mobility plan for the future, or?
Well, just the different principles. I mean, you've got to figure out how to implement them, and how are you going to assign costs to the implementation process, or what kind of recommendations you're going to make to the board for budgeting relative to each of those guiding principles implementation?
Absolutely. Well, and I'll let Holly and Bill weigh in on this as well. Essentially, we're taking it from the approach of, let's first sort of determine what we think our fiscal constraints are, so that we understand, what is the universe of the big bucket right now. And that is a challenge right now, given that things are moving. COVID funding is coming into the organization. So we're going to start with sort of the bigger picture constraints. And then I was going to talk about this at the end, but I'll share it now because I'm so excited about it. What we're moving into next is a series of scenario planning. And so we are going to be looking at different sort of hypothetical scenarios moving forward in the future. And those could involve different financial scenarios as well. So the idea is that we all sort of come to an agreement on the universe of options, and then we can start identifying, as we identify strategies, and determining where those would be applicable under which scenarios. Holly, actually, do you want to talk a little bit more about since you're the one that's going to be leading a little bit more of that?
Yeah. So a couple of things. I would say that as we move farther through the framework that Julie talked about, we will assign costs to the strategies that rise to the top as being recommendations. At this point, of course, it's just a big brain dump of ideas of potential strategies. But certainly we haven't landed, and then we'll do an evaluation of them. How well do these 5 strategies address these guiding principles and our overarching objectives that we're trying to achieve? And then to your point, there's right now there's certainly a big fiscal constraint, but there's a fiscal constraint even on our best days. We aren't able to accomplish everything in the world we could possibly want to do. So it will be some trade-offs and trying to make sure we've covered all the guiding principles. But certainly there are trade-offs in what we'll be able to afford at the end of the day. And then Julie talked a little bit about the scenario planning that we're preparing for now. And I think you hit it right on the head, Julie. Basically, the way the exercise works is we look for what we call driving forces in our industry. What are the driving forces that are going to influence RTD's success in the future, 10, 20 years out? What's really going to have a big influence on RTD? And you might have things that you come up with. You could have a whole huge host of things, but it might be things like the economy is going to have a big impact on RTD's success. Availability of technology, autonomous vehicles is going to have a big impact on what RTD looks like. Land use patterns have a big influence on, so there's a whole host, right? There's tons and tons of things that have an impact. Some of them we have a good handle on, like, for instance, demographics. We sort of know how people age, and we know that we're aging as a population. So we have a good handle on those. Some of them we don't have a good handle on, and that's where scenario planning comes into play. We try and identify those driving forces that have both a big influence on RTD. They have the potential to have big impacts on RTD. And they also have a relatively high level of being unknown. I can't readily predict what's going to happen. Like I can readily predict that next year I will be a year older than I am today. So we take those that have both a big influence, potential to have big influence on RTD, and they have a high level of unknown outcome to them. And we do some scenario planning around those, and those you select strategies to respond to those different scenarios. And then strategies that rise to the top are those that are whether the economy is good and ridership is high, or the economy is bad and ridership is low, as a hypothetical scenarios. Those are not the real scenarios, but you would pick strategies that help RTD be resilient and strong in any of those scenarios. So those are the strategies that start to rise to the top as those are just darn good ideas. We should go look at doing some of those. So that's the exercise we'll be working on as we move forward. And that helps to prioritize a bit as well.
Just one thing to add too, to think about this process. I mean, we don't expect this once, we've done the process, that goal is the end of the year, that this is going to be this static document that, sits on a shelf for 10 years. We figure that, our scenarios that we talk about this year, 4 or 5 years from now, we'll know a lot more. So the expectation is with this, I mean, we're looking at a fairly long-term, kind of timeline, like Julie said, 2030, 2050 as a time frame. And as we go forward, we'll talk about kind of what things kind of fall out from this from a priority perspective, because they address multiple objectives, and those are the ones I think that'll kind of rise to the top. But at the same time, we shouldn't look at this as kind of being the static document that's just going to kind of be able. We'll come back to this, and I think we'll be constantly. The expectation is constantly coming back to this document saying, how have things changed over the last 2 years, 3 years, or whatever, and what things do we need to adjust? So to think about it that way too, is that, we're going to be making some recommendations today or this year, but we all know, I mean, who knew 2 years ago we were going to get to pandemic and what change that would have on the agency. So we're going to have to be somewhat dynamic with, the end result of this process.
So that was a very long answer to your question.
Yeah.
I apologize, but I did want to kind of tee that up, because that's where we're heading next, just so you can start seeing how the bits and pieces are going to pull together. Because
Julie, you do have a comment in the chat that you just made. Catherine said it's fairly certain that some of the principles are going to be in tension with the others. So agree, it's good to start neutrally as possible. And I would agree with that you will definitely start to see some trade-offs when you have fiscal limitation, for sure.
Great. Terrific. Thank you, Holly. So with that, I'd like to, if we're okay, I'd like to move into the next phase, which is the discussion piece. So now you're starting to see how the pieces of this puzzle for the mobility plan for the future are going to come together. So what we'd like to spend the next 15 minutes or so with you is listening. That's what we really want to do. So what you just heard is we want to start identifying strategies. And so we're going to start with strategies, because the scenario planning is, as it plays out, we're going to be applying the strategies to determine where to move forward. So we're starting with a sort of no stone unturned approach. This is going to be a big part of our public outreach as well, meeting with the employees, meeting with groups like yourself, meeting with TMOs and TMAs and the whole group, and asking these questions. So we have these guiding principles. So what types of strategies? So they could be related to parking or fleet, service operations, or technology. And what types of strategies could be? They could be policies, they could be result in need for capital investment or operational enhancements. So really, it's a pretty broad opportunity for us to hear from you, especially you guys that just know RTD so well, to start thinking about if you were going to start taking these guiding principles apart, and you could pick any of them that you're passionate about and say, okay, from a mobility perspective, boy, here's a strategy I would love to see. Or from a partnership perspective, gosh, we'd love to see you work with this group. So really, I didn't want to kind of frame it too much for you, because we're really hoping to just get some ideas. So love to, if you want to put things in chat, you can just enter directly, or you could just talk and we'll be taking notes, but we'd love to just pick your brains for a few minutes if you have any ideas for us. Please, Andrea.
I'm looking at mobility and equity, and we need to make sure that underserved neighborhoods really get the service they need that is affordable for them.
Yeah. Great. I'm just taking some notes as you guys are talking. That's great. Okay.
Andrea,
and I don't know
ask
what
for
order.
a little bit of a follow-up there. When you say underserved neighborhoods get the service they need at a price they can afford, underserved neighborhoods as in, give me more description of what, I just want to make sure that I'm interpreting. I have an interpretation. I want to make sure I have your interpretation.
Great.
Yeah, what's the word for the workers? The people, essential. Thank you. It just escaped my mind. I really think our essential workers who live in places, well, they can't afford a car, they can't afford gas, and they have to depend on bus service. I mean, the trains really are for the more affluent people. They need to depend on bus service to get them to their jobs. And their jobs are McDonald's and Taco Bell and Burger King. We need to make sure that those less affluent neighborhoods have the service that they need.
Great. That's very helpful.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, I apologize. I'm not necessarily going in order because of the way my screen keeps moving around. So I apologize if I'm not going exact order, but we'll get to everybody. Danny?
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Danny here. I also tend to focus on equity and quality of experience with my role here on the committee. And one thing I want to make sure is included in equity is going beyond getting buses and trains to people, like making those accessible to them, considering our regional geography. I think that is a baseline. When I think of equity and doing something better is also making that experience better. And one thing that I keep in mind is, particularly for the people, like Andrea said, who kind of need this, they have to use this to get around, it isn't necessarily a choice, is that from my experience, one thing I have noticed writing RTD is that I find it fascinating that in Colorado, with our climate, our weather patterns here, that the structures that keep people out of the elements are sorely lacking. Not in every place, but in most. And even if I'm under a structure, we get so much weather year round that can just blow everything everywhere. The structures are insufficient. And I include that in the equity piece because it shouldn't be just about getting people access nearby to being able to get on a bus or on a train, but it should also be a humanized experience and not make it people just, oh, I have access to a bus, but I'm standing out in the rain or hail or heavy snow the whole time. And that is a reality in our environment. And I've been really curious how much attention that might get in the future to make it a quality experience. And I love to see quality of life under mobility. I want that to get a lot of attention, the quality of the experience.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Joan?
Thanks, Julie. The one thing that I did want to add, and I just don't know if you guys have already thought about this already, is that I obviously recognize that the Accountability Committee is doing a lot of really great work. They're also really interested in doing a lot of legislation to help RTD, which I guess that would kind of fall under the partnership pillar. But that's just something that I just really want to make sure that as they're also developing their own set of strategies and goals, that those are, of course, getting aligned with the Reimagine RTD program.
Absolutely. That's great feedback. Thank you very much. Travis?
Yeah, one of the things I've thought about is RTD really was a role model in partnering with employers and say like the EcoPass program, but it works really well for office commuters and not necessarily for essential workers or small businesses and that type of thing. And so when you think of like from an equity and a financial perspective as well as partnerships, I think there's a tremendous room for RTD to sort of reimagine how do you work with all those smaller employers, as well as say like a big employer like Target, where a local store manager is probably not really empowered to set up a transit program. Like, how could you create those sort of relationships with those type of employers so that it works for a lot of the hourly employees that don't right now have access to EcoPass or things like that?
Got it. Okay, great. Just making sure I'm capturing all this. This is terrific. Let's see, Roger, I think.
Yeah, just a question under partnerships. To what extent are the partnerships considerations going to extend to first and last mile considerations?
Well, that is an excellent question. I mean, it is definitely an issue that we hear, and we've heard through the SOP process as well. And we are definitely interested in identifying strategies to talk about that and to clarify maybe the role between RTD and local jurisdictions, things like that. So we've got some work to do on that, but it is definitely within the purview of what we would consider partnerships for sure.
And I would add that I think that the first and last mile strategic plan that we did a couple of years ago really emphasized the fact that this was a really important piece, because RTD does not, in most cases, control much of the access to our facilities, our stops, and we need to work closely with our partners at the lower jurisdiction level on these first and last mile connections.
And then a separate question related to the extent to which RTD is going to begin doing more in the area of affordable housing development on its property?
Bill, do you want
I can address that. Yeah. So and many of you probably know or read that we recently adopted an equitable TOD policy. One of the goals of that policy is try to encourage affordable housing on a property that we own. So we own a fairly finite set of property in our system, mainly at park and rides and station locations. What we've said is, and we do this it's not extensive, but we do partnerships with developers. We wanted to be very intentional with those partnerships as we move into the future, and really express that affordable housing is a priority for the agency. So what that policy did was basically gave us some tools to be a little bit more flexible in how we can deal with that. Things like how we replace parking, how we account for affordable housing when we look at value to the agency. So those are some of the things that we'll do. It doesn't like do things like discount land or other things that I think some other agencies do, but I think it does go along. It does set a goal that of the property that we do work with private developers to develop, that about 30% of the development, the residential development, would be affordable. And we define affordable in the same context as the way the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority does, which right now is at 60% of area median income. So hopefully that gives you a little perspective on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Matt, I've been waiting to call on Matt. I know he's got some ideas.
Oh, no, nothing too brilliant. People actually came up with lots of great thoughts.
Mhm.
So it's hard not to focus on equity, even though I think that means different things to each of us in various ways. But I think we're just going to have a hard time with it because, frankly, of our land use patterns that RTD does not control and shouldn't control, honestly. But I think in some ways the hardest thing besides the money, but the hardest thing is going to be melding in some way the equity and mobility issues. I think what you see now on a lot of the routes, and I agree, a lot of certainly the rail routes, which are expensive, is the routes that carry a lot of people. And look, our goal is to carry a lot of people. That's got to be one of the goals of this, is not maybe maximize, but certainly try to carry as many people as we can on transit. Many of the routes that do that don't happen to serve the lower income people, the essential workforce, whatever you want to call it. That's due to land use patterns. And they're not going anywhere. You know, maybe over 50 years they'll change, but it's going to be a long haul to change them. So I think that tension is really one of the key issues here. And to me, it reiterates the need also to look at that first and final mile. I wish it was just a mile. It's really miles in many cases, both at the residential end and frankly, often at the employment end. You get into some big industrial park and you still need to be able to get to where you're going. So I think that's really critical. And the two areas that fall into that, to me, are then partnerships, both with the private sector, but also with the various RTD communities. I think they're going to have to play a bigger role, and that's going to be a very interesting conversation, put it mildly. But I think that's inevitable if we're going to really make progress in the equity front. And then the second thing is, you know, technology. And really, how is that going to change things? And the only other thought I would have, and you've thought of all of these things before, you know, post-COVID, we were heading here anyway, but this is probably speeding things up, is, you know, how is the nature of work changing? If rush hour is a smaller percentage of total ridership in the future, and or rush hour is extended, what does that mean to traditional transit agencies that have focused for so long on rush hour services? I don't know the answer to that, but it seems like a good question. Back to the equity issue, you know, one of the places we and most agencies are not great with equity is, of course, and this often is lower income people who work odd hours, what we consider to be odd hours, right? Early in the morning, late at night. How do they get to where they're going? Maybe we still have service, but it becomes frankly unusable, right? You know, every half hour, every hour, something like that. Service that is so bad that you frankly have to be desperate, which a lot of people are, to use it. So those would be the things I'd stir in, and I'm sure you know about them. And it just kind of points out, as somebody mentioned earlier, how in the end you got to do some trade-offs. But I don't think any one of these can totally take priority as much as maybe we'd like to. You see a system that tries to have a lot of riders, even if a lot of them are, you know, not lower income, because if you want support in the community, especially taxpayer support, you got to serve a broad range of citizens in the service area. And that's, from a practical perspective, that's just logical that we do that. I'm looking to see not just how we do that, but also the type of data you can present us and the board, really, to help thread a path through all of that. And this is not going to just be data driven. There's obviously a lot of, there's politics involved, but there's also, you know, goals and ethical ideas and so on. But the data will certainly help drive it. And I'm really interested in the types of data you can come up with that would really help people thread their way through those difficult problems, without having to just stare at endless spreadsheets, but data that really, I guess, to the nub of the crux of these questions. That's a long-winded, many-pointed set of comments, but I'm looking forward to hearing what other people have to say, because they've been really spot on in their comments too.
Absolutely. Terrific. Thank you, Matt. That was great. Let's see, Ben.
Yeah, thanks. I really can kind of piggyback on, I think one of the, fundamental and great tensions in public transit, particularly here in Denver, is the issue of ridership versus geographic coverage. And it obviously has a lot of equity implications as well. And
Can you guys hear Ben?
Ben, I think you're freezing up. Maybe try turning off your camera and see if you can get a little more bandwidth there. You want to go to
we'll
Andrea
come back.
next, and we'll come back to Ben.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Excuse me. I have two comments. One, I was on the Centennial Planning Commission for 12 years, and we would get apartment complexes come in anywhere from 30 to 1,500 units. And I would always throw out there, there's no transit anywhere near this. That means there has to be 1,500 cars. And that would just die on the vine. The comment would just be totally ignored. And that's your land planning issue. I said it over and over and over again, and it meant nothing to anyone. My other comment is that RTD's LIVE program is not affordable. People used to be able to get 50% off on ride coupons, and now this is only 40%. That makes it even less affordable for the people who can't afford the fares. The fares are high. And that's it for me.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I really appreciate that. Let's see, Pastor?
Thank you. I wanted to just first of all affirm many of the comments and statements that have already been made. I think interestingly, the tagline "Reimagine" that well preceded, our current environment, actually needs to become the focal point, because if there was ever a time in the business history of RTD, this is the time to really reimagine. Because unfortunately, I think prior to the moment that we're in right now, a lot of even the Reimagine campaign was really based on, hey, this is the animal that we created. Can you guys help us figure out how to make this animal work in places it's not working? Because as Andrea just kind of said, the animal wasn't really created with the intention to work for everybody. It was based on a business model, profit model, et cetera, and I'm not knocking that, but I'm just, stating the facts. But then when you discover that animal was not, really relative to everybody, who was a part of the bigger community, and it was not satisfying certain needs over here. So then you start trying to figure out, hey, how can we kind of rearrange some of the animal parts and what have you? But you before this moment, you're kind of stuck with saying, well, but we built this so it could reach the maximum number of people. It could be it could also meet its most profitable margins. Now we are in a moment where, you have to hope that this will even be an animal that's necessary for the masses, that it's going to mean the same thing to people when we get further down the road, beyond this pandemic, because there were already some changes that were happening with transportation, with Uber and Lyft and what have you, prior to the pandemic, that were competing with the original animal that was created. So really what I'm driving at here, this would be a great opportunity for RTD to truly reimagine what do people need the most and put that at the center and the heartbeat of what has to be recreated. Because one way or the other, either the marketplace is going to force RTD to make some drastic changes, or RTD gets to become the leader to say, hey, let's think outside of the box. Let us not be limited to what we already created and try to get these parts to, get people to make these parts work where they are not working. Maybe we truly fully reimagine and be willing to build what is going to be more available to the larger population, and really start to think about what are the transportation needs really going to look like much further down the road. Those are my comments.
Absolutely. I'm inspired. We should have you presenting a lot of this stuff. That's really great. And that is exactly where the scenario planning piece comes from. It's exactly right. It's like, how do you plan when you're not exactly sure where things are going to land? So you develop scenarios, right? And you look and you say, okay, well, now we've got all these strategies and they work great under these 3 scenarios and not great under this one. So spot on. I think you've really nailed what we're trying to accomplish here. So I really appreciate that.
Hey, if I can jump in, I was going to ask Adele just to follow up, because I'm curious on your comments. Really, I am. And your comments are great as always. If you had to pick 1 or 2 things that you think RTD is kind of falling down on at the moment, not doing a good job serving, that really need to be reimagined the most, if I could put it that way, what pops into your mind?
Probably, Matt, 2 things that would come to the immediate surface. The need to provide transportation service for people who have mobility issues. Mm-hmm. If you think about it, transportation means that it means getting a person from a place they can't get themselves to, and to provide that kind of assistance and access. That's, whether it's a bus, whether it's a train, or whether it's the proper vehicle for people who have physical impairments that would prevent them from being able to do what they would like to do. RTD could have really become more specialized in that area to be the dominant entity that provides those kinds of services, because you're a part of the technically a part of the infrastructure of the community. So that would be one thing. The second thing, this kind of came up also before COVID. We shared it in one of our meetings with our with some of our regional our regional leaders, and we talked about creating customized services in pocket areas. There are communities that might only need specialized service to get people who live in this neighborhood to the businesses in that neighborhood, whether it's a grocery store, whether it's a mom and pop shop, but it's a place where it's well-traveled, it's a natural part of that setting. And if you provided the little, bus, if you will, that can go around and say, hey, from this hour to this hour, we take everybody up to the pharmacy, we take everybody up to the supermarket, we take everybody up to the trade store that's in that community. That could have created not only a profitable opportunity, but it's also sending back that message that RTD is a part of your infrastructure, because Lyft and Uber, they're not going to do that. That's not what they specialize in. But, RTD could have had the bandwidth to look at any community where you're not able to get the regular bus services working. If you could have created those neighborhood transportation, opportunities, that would have sent a tremendous message to your ridership.
Flex rides everywhere.
Yes. Yes.
Julie, I do want to just go over to the chat for a quick second. There was a couple of items that Dawn put in that I thought were great. Dawn, you said this is weirdly specific in regards to equity and sustainability. I love that. I think that is it's a very tangible and specific. Now, whether it rises to the top and we can do something like that, but those kind of strategies I think that's great. You know, where you're bringing the comment specifically is around zero emission buses being used in some of those equity neighborhoods. So we're talking about the quality of life, air quality, and making sure that we're, you know, both hitting on some equity issues we have, as well as sustainability opportunities under sustainability. So I think that was really great. And then there was another one that I just want to bring people's attention to. There was also a discussion around the partnerships with Uber, Lyft, those. And I gotta tell you, you said in here, Dawn, really advertising loudly any of the cool partnerships. And I will tell you, we just went to the technical working group and the advisory committee and talked about a couple that RTD has brought to fruition even through the pandemic. And, you know, even amongst this group of people who's quite aware of what's going on with RTD, and they don't know. So I totally agree with you, like advertising all the great work and the great partnerships that RTD is successfully doing and letting people know that RTD is open to those partnerships. It doesn't necessarily seem like the word is out maybe as much as we might think it is.
Yeah, thank you for noticing those. The first one is free, right? The first one in terms of like just making sure that, you know, and it's something that that RTD can utilize in terms of marketing to show that we are trying to be the best public steward that we possibly can. But the second one, I have to say, I know a bunch of like college age people, they don't know anything about this, but they're the kind of folks that might utilize it. So, and I know it's an investment, but it's an investment in the next generation really actively participating with transit. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for checking the chat comments, Holly. I appreciate that. Ben, I wanted to get back to you. How's your connection? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you. Perfect.
Okay.
You got started, and then we lost you there for a second.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know. I kept like talking and talking, so I'm not quite sure where I
we got as far as ridership versus coverage.
Yeah, so yeah, I just wanted
that's
to
all that we got.
That's all we heard.
just bring up that fundamental issue of, which I think is particularly important in Denver, given the size of the district and frankly the politics of the board and all that, you know, the tension between maximizing ridership and geographic reach of the system. And I guess I think most everybody knows I'm on the Reimagine committee representing this group, and I'm in that fundamental issue. I'm definitely leaning toward, you know, using scarce resources to maximize ridership as opposed to trying to, you know, reach the far ends of this vast geographic area we're in. And it's a, you know, it's a great discussion item.
Absolutely.
In general.
Absolutely. And we expect that one to come up across different guiding principles as well.
Right.
You know, definitely that's certainly a mobility focused as well as financial. So definitely recognize that's an ongoing discussion, and we're excited to get into that a little bit, even with the scenario planning.
I bet.
So I want to watch our time, Roger. Keep me posted on time. We got a couple more. I wanted to get to Joan and then Roger, and then we may need to get you guys back to your other agenda. Joan, you want to go next?
Yes, thank you so much. I was just typing in the chat. I have another meeting technically in 7 minutes that is exactly about this particular thing that I think is extremely important for the Reimagine RTD committee to be considering. And I didn't even think about it until someone brought up EcoPasses. A lot of us in this group, the CAC, are involved in this effort, but there is an employer-based trip reduction regulation that is coming forward in the foreseeable future. And what that means is any employer with a delta of 100 to 250 plus individuals going into a given work site will be required to create commute trip reductions for their staff. A lot of the approaches for this program right now are hinged on transit and NACTO standards for transit volume. I can send the draft in the chat really quickly before I go to a listening session for this particular regulation. But obviously, when we're thinking about scenario planning and how our workforces are going to get to the office, a lot of those alternative options are heavily reliant either on availability of transit or being able to telework. And for those that are unable to telework, one of the most quote unquote cost-effective ways to get your workforce to the office is going to be transit. Mm-hmm. And even then, you know, carpool and van flow is an option, but it is very comprehensive and complex. And a lot of that really relies upon, you know, where exactly that business is located. Mm-hmm. So I highly recommend, if you have not heard about this, I'll put a couple of links in the chat about this. Very important. And Susan Wood, also on the RTD team, has been involved in the process and is also a board of directors for the Regional Air Quality Council that will be voting on this regulation. So that's all I've got. I hope that was not too fast.
No, that was great. And I don't know, Bill, if you had any comments on that. We were talking about that actually just this morning. So definitely RTD is very involved in that. I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to add, Bill.
No, I think we've been made very aware of this fact, but I actually, you know, I think that both the advisory committee and the technical working group, and again, we're going to be following this and working through it throughout the process.
Great, thank you so much. There was one other person that had a hand up, and then we had another couple of chats. Oh, maybe I don't see. Am I missing somebody?
Yeah. Roger, I think
Roger. Oh, Roger, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry,
That's
Roger.
all right. I just wanted to piggyback on a comment that Pastor Dell made about neighborhood shuttle services, if you will. And thinking about partnerships, if RTD were to partner in helping communities deal with creating, operating, maintaining small things like that, like the city of Inglewood does, where they provide a virtual first and last mile shuttle service from the Inglewood Light Rail Station down as far east as Swedish Hospital, maybe beyond Swedish. There's a large senior housing complex, and it makes stops all along the way, picks up people, takes them to the library and King Soopers and the light rail station and back and forth. And then a lot of the businesses and organizations along the way contribute to the support of that, along with the city of Inglewood. And it is an interesting model, and I just didn't know if RTD had ever looked at it and thought about replicating it in partnership with communities. So just a thought.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great.
And just a comment on that, we're actually involved in that project. We helped to establish that shuttle system, and I believe we contribute to it. I'm not completely sure. I know that if there's anybody from service planning on that can address that, but yeah, we're very aware of Inglewood and very involved.
Well, have you expanded it anywhere else? Have you taken it and marketed
Well,
it to other
we've certainly looked at other types of areas. Done, you know, one of the ones that comes to mind is the Lone Tree Link, and you know, some other ones that have been initiated by some of the jurisdictions that we support. And some of the challenges for us are, you know, in the service planning on, they talk about service standards and how those work, and you know, how those incorporate into whether or not you can continue the service after it started. And so we have to, but they're really important, and they're really a high priority. We've heard from multiple people about this kind of a partnership that we have to address as we go forward with this project.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Well, we did get a couple more on the chat while we're going through. Just let's see, Elizabeth, the Lone Tree has the link on demand. So it has its own app. So that's kind of similar to the discussion, you know, that we were just having. Catherine Sanders, successful pilot using FlexRide at 144th and I-25. FlexRide is never going to be a highly productive service, but if someone really takes personal ownership of the service, there may be opportunities to optimize. So that's great feedback. And then let's see, Travis, and we'll capture all these, you know, building on Pastor Dell's comment. I think RTD should evaluate each local bus route to assess if it holistically serves a community. Many routes only feed from a neighborhood to a rail station, but they require a transfer to achieve basic life necessities like going to the grocery store. So that's really taking a look at that, those travel patterns in the community and making sure that we're addressing them. I think, oh, then we had a question. If somebody can let me know the differentiation between the Reimagine meetings, technical working group and advisory committee meetings, I'll greatly appreciate it. Oh, I think it's Joan, she's left. So we will follow up with her on that one. So she said her email address. So with that, I think we'll do one more, and then I just have one more quick slide, but I want to make sure that you have time for the rest of your agenda. This has been tremendously helpful. So Danny, you can kind of wrap us up on the comments, and then I'll go back to kind of wrap up on the presentation.
Sure, I have a comment about something that may not be able to be changed through this process. And if that's the case, please tell me so. And it's an observation that I had when I first moved here from the East Coast, where I had been writing public transportation for many years. And Pastor Dell, of course, you've said so many interesting things today, as many of you have, and you made me think of this in particular. Right away, I realized that even though I have no issues with what I'm about to say, I thought our trains in particular are ableism on display. And as long as our trains have steep steps that get slippery, and as long as the only way that you can get to, get on with assistance is to go up the ramp at the front of a train or something, it is going to be ableism on display. And I don't know if our trains are something we can change with this process or at some point, but I will say as long as our trains are the way they are, it is still ableism on display. And other things that we're doing are incremental changes, but it still shows that including certain communities and certain people is still an afterthought. And that I think is a massive expense, I'm sure. But it's something that I think we should, anybody tied to any of this work should be prepared to engage in conversations about those kinds of things that are not tied to future service sites or other kinds of infrastructure, but just the fact that our trains are difficult to get on and off of for a lot of people. We should be mindful of that and be ready to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that. I appreciate, because that's kind of similar to your first comment where you're tying mobility to quality of life. So it's not just, do we have a connection to get you from here to here? What is that experience? How reliable is it? How accessible is it? So I think that's great feedback. Well, let me, we could do this.
Julie, just to jump in for 1 second. Roger and I kind of agreed that if this goes a little long, we're good. So to the group, if you've got any other comments, don't be shy.
Absolutely.
Great conversation.
We'll stay here all day. I just don't want to take up your time.
We may not stay all day. That would be but, if you've got any more comments on this or on whatever the next slide is going to be, don't get put off by the fact that in theory we only have 5 minutes left. We could go a little bit longer on this. We always leave room at the end of the meeting. So if you've got comments, now's your chance. Raise your hand and get your thoughts in.
Love to hear from Nancy.
Well, I put in the chat, I think the key to making it all work is the work community needs to understand. And so with the new CEO, what a perfect chance to go to every one of these places: Target, McDonald's, Lowe's, Home Depot, King's, Walmart. They all have foundations. They all give back to our communities, and maybe they need and they all need workers. There's a sign at every one of them. So maybe they don't know it. It's not going to the store manager in that store because they turn over a lot. It's going higher up and explaining if that happened in each one, because all of these people are in each one of our cities. So if they did it as a mass piece, I just think many things could happen for the mobility and the equity, because they need those workers as much as anybody else.
Mm-hmm. A great example for the partnership discussion. That's great. We had another comment from Dawn on the chat as well, just agreeing with Roger and Pastor Dell that transit is so big that RTD needs to function more like an area being like each area being a state. Some places are well covered for localized service, some are not. More effort in this regard could ultimately make service more relevant. So I appreciate that feedback as well. What else?
I'll add one more comment. This has been a lot of focus.
This has been great.
And some others about, having kind of these neighborhood routes that get people from where they are to the places they're going, not necessarily work, but places they need to go for their everyday lives. And, that is a great idea, but of course that really butts up against two things. One is RTD and most transit agencies being set up to largely deal with rush hour, home to work travel. Because that's where a lot of the riders are, let's face it. Certainly the regular riders are, and you can't ignore them. In fact, you don't want to ignore them for obvious reasons. So you got that. And then the second one, of course, takes us back to land use. And that's where it gets so tricky, because a lot of the places that do have reduced service, whether at the residential end or at the store end, they're just pretty low density, they're suburban densities. Mm-hmm. And they're sprawled out across RTD's immense region, as Ben has noted. And it's really tough to make that work. And, is that a place where technology will help, where partnerships will help? Great questions. I mean, I think it's exactly what you got to focus on. But, without beating up RTD, because I don't think that gets us anywhere, it's kind of obvious why a lot of those places are underserved currently, because the land uses are so non-conducive to transit as we know it. Let's put it that way. Transit as we have seen it over the many years, not just in this country, but all over the world. We're not unique in this. So that would definitely take some reimagining, especially in financial constraints. But I think it's a great thing to work on, and thanks to all the people who have raised it.
Well, and we've gotten that feedback before too, also in some of our efforts from the SOP last year, that it's also under equity, because a lot of individuals no longer can afford to live close to the urban cores, and so they're moving out. And so you also have equity populations that are struggling to be served in these areas as well. So I agree, Matt, that's a great framing of that issue.
So Matt, on that note, because I think you raised an important question, because now we're looking at how does RTD respond to something like this after the fact, and you don't want your biggest stumbling block to be the mechanics of it, right? So I think what Roger mentioned earlier, if we could find ways where there are partnerships that could be created, so perhaps we find an entity in that neighborhood community that already has the land space, the usable land space and what have you, and then you're kind of adding another layer of benefit to that neighborhood that's going to boost income resource for that entity that you partner with, and then they also get to kind of share in the credit of bringing this kind of that kind of service into that community. That could be one way to slow walk this in to some key communities, to give some time further down the road to really figure out how do you try to really build this into the larger mechanism.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Andrew, you had another thought for us?
Yes, I just read within the last week, and I'll be darned if I can remember where, a study that was done by a university showing that you get more passengers if you run your rush hour service all day long, that people are traveling all day. And it's not just 8 to 10 or 6 to 8, it's all day long. And they recommended that to at least 2 transit services, and Cincinnati seems to stay in my mind. And they did up their ridership by a certain percentage, that they changed all their schedules.
Oh, that's great feedback. That's great. And that gets into, the evaluation we're going to be doing related to changes in travel patterns. So, does rush hour service make sense anymore? Where are people working? Are they going into the offices? Those types of things. So that's great feedback. I'd like to, go ahead, Danny.
I feel like a thread I heard from Andrea and Matt and Pastor Dell, please tell me if I'm wrong, that is an interesting thing to just contemplate with the Reimagine piece, is not just, are we sticking to these guiding principles and are they right? But what is the essence of the purpose of RTD anymore? And it isn't just about work, it's about life. And if it's about life, then that gives us more guidance on what we should value. If it's about work, it's different. And I do think it's changed. And if it's about life, it gets more complicated. But that also speaks to not just talking about work and commuting, but getting to see your friends and family on RTD, getting to social and cultural and athletic events on RTD and have that be a good experience. And I think that's exciting. And I feel like that's where, I haven't thought of that until this moment, that's one also of my curiosities coming from other places that I've lived where it was just life. I did everything. I would just go see people. I wouldn't necessarily get in my car unless I just had to. And so, but it really changes, I think, priorities and values along the way.
That's great feedback. And it's funny, when we were working on the guiding principles, Holly and I, we kept coming back to the word freedom. And I think that sort of encapsulates a lot of what you're talking about. Is that, do I have the freedom to travel when I want to travel, to do what I want to do, as opposed to sort of being limited to, just commute travel and things like that. So I think that's a great observation.
Hey, so Julie, on that note, this kind of circles back to one thing I mentioned that we discussed before the pandemic. To Danny's observation here, so I just want to confirm, yeah, you were definitely hearing correctly what I believe we were trying to express. Think about how Uber was able to embed the transportation model. They did exactly that. They said, well, this is what people are being provided. This is what they're being given. But what do people really want? And I got to tell you, I'm the guy who was like, when I first heard about what Uber was, I'm like, who in the world would ever get in a stranger's car to take why would I do that? I'll get in my own car. Why would I ever do that? But they were intuitively smart to really see that people are not satisfied with what they've been offered. They simply relegate themselves to what's been offered until somebody offers them something different. And that's what Uber and Lyft did. And I believe the same thing can happen with RTD, with, again, the whole feature of being reimagined. What does it really look like when you start to think about, well, what do people really want? Lifestyle-wise, even what Andrea just showed with this latest example. Somewhere, how many years ago, somebody decided that bus service should run during peak hours that they have identified as rush hour. But that was how many years ago? How many eons ago? And people have relegated to that because that's all that's been available. But what would they do if you offer them something else? So I think that has a lot of bandwidth. If RTD looks at, maybe we could be in the business of providing people transportation just to go see their family members, with their friends and what have you, and create and build a new model from there.
Hey, Julie, you should move on to the next slide. But Pastor Dell, Uber does a great job, and I've used them, but they're a questionable role model. They're a company that loses $6 billion a year.
Oh, I agree with that. Yes, yes.
And their drivers make less than minimum wage.
Right. So we obviously can't follow them to the edge of the cliff, no doubt about that. But just the intuitive thinking is what I'm putting out there.
I get it. Yeah. All right, Julie.
Well, terrific. Well, I'm about to get the hook out of here. So just one last slide. This has been fantastic. So just, we always like to give you an update on where we're going publicly next from a public engagement perspective. So obviously we're going to build on a lot of the great stuff we did last year. We are going to continue. Our website's a great place if you ever have questions. We're going to, we did this great detailed statistically valid survey last year that's got a lot of really good information that we're going to dig through that. And we're going to continue with these targeted outreach meetings. We talked about those a lot last year. We're meeting with those groups that traditionally have been a little harder to reach. So, we did meetings with the unions to talk about essential workers. We've done meetings with advocacies for immigration groups. We've done a meeting with the Colorado Center for the Blind. So those have been just terrific meetings. We're going to continue that moving forward. And then something we're going to do that's a little bit different, we're going to continue doing our meetings with other organizations. But again, you see this now structure that we have with the guiding principles. So we're going to be really reaching out, and we'll talk to any group about anything, but we really want to target those groups that their main mission, their main passion, their main goal is associated to something relative to the guiding principles. So it's where we talked about, let's go to the employees. They're very passionate about workforce issues because they are the workforce. So we'll continue talking to them. The mobility, TMOs and TMAs, equity. Obviously, we've had some great meetings with, Dr. Mack and the LCCs. So we're going to be doing a lot of these and very similar to kind of the structure we have here. So we would love your thoughts. Send Roger and he'll forward them our way. Any thoughts you have on, boy, this would be a great group to meet with, or I was talking to somebody the other day who was really passionate about this, love to get them involved. If you guys could just funnel that through Roger and get it to us, we would love any thoughts to kind of maximize your networks as well. And then coming in the fall, we're going to do some traditional public meetings. At this point, thinking probably they're virtual, but you never know. We're hoping to, start getting out into the world a little bit more. So 2 meetings in August and October to start getting into a little bit more of, these draft strategies as we move forward. So in terms of next steps, April 6th, that's when we're going to get the official blessing from the board on the guiding principles. Coming back to talk to you, we're going to start the scenario planning stuff in May. And then to Matt's point, there's a lot of technical work going behind the scenes. So Matt had a great point. Give us the data that helps us understand what these trade-offs are, what these decisions are. That's a lot of what we're actually starting in the background right now, whether it's travel demand forecasting, mobility as a service, we're just going to be looking at a lot of these technical issues as well. So with that, I just want to say thank you. This is the first group we've kind of done this style with, and it's terrific. You gave us great ideas. We're going to keep collecting them. If you have other epiphanies as you walk out of this meeting, send them to Roger. He'll always get them to get them to us. And I just really appreciate your time. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you all. That was great. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for listening to us. We'll have to figure out, and the board will have to figure this out too, how to, kind of work with you and do a deeper dive. It's hard. There's just so many issues that are on the table. And, today we kind of tossed out lots of great ideas and actually managed to have something of a conversation, which was fabulous. But when we really get into the nitty gritty and some of the trade-offs, we'll have to figure out how to structure that in a way that works for us and works for you, gets your questions answered relatively efficiently. So yeah, let's figure out how to do that. Roger clearly will be in contact with you, and we will invite you back as many times as you'd like to come chat with us.
Love it. Hope to see you guys a lot this year.
All right, thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.
Okay. Okay, we've got one more presentation conversation on the agenda, and this is with Michael Davies, who's RTD's new government relations officer, whom I certainly haven't met. I imagine most of us haven't. So, Michael, if you would maybe turn on your video, if you can do that, so we can see you.
Yes. Hi, Matt. Can you
take it away?
Hear and see me?
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for the time and opportunity just to introduce myself. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. As Matt mentioned, I'm the new government relations officer for RTD. Just a little background on myself. My elected official experience comes from working for one of California's senior senators for about 8 years. That was my job out of college, and it gave me a great perspective on kind of what the role that an elected official needs. And then through that job, actually, I learned a lot about Los Angeles County's transportation system. And so for the last 7 years, I've been the government relations representative for LA Metro. And I was based in Washington, D.C., which is, it's a little unique for that position to actually have a staff member for the agency in Washington, D.C., but it's a large enough congressional delegation and large enough number of issues that it made sense to have an actual staffer there tracking down that work. And so that's led to me to here to RTD Denver, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity. Just a few points on kind of the role and the goals that I'm hoping to kind of accomplish with my role here is certainly just to be an active point of contact for elected officials and stakeholders on all information that revolves around legislative advocacy and how RTD interacts with our government entities at all levels, local, state, and federal. And so, yeah, I certainly hope to work with you all, work with the region's representatives, and try to be a strategic gathering point to make sure that we can connect some of the things that we're trying to do at RTD with legislative specific goals and advocacy to accomplish those objectives. So that's largely what I'm working to do. I guess I'll stop there, and happy to take any questions. And yeah.
Michael, you might want to maybe just talk a little bit about what are the 2 or 3 things that have kept you busy since you've gotten here. I mean, we've got a lot of issues, a lot of irons in the fire, but there are some critical things that are kind of front and center right now. Maybe that would be helpful to the group also.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Roger. So, at the state level, I started this job and immediately became very familiar with the Accountability Committee and the work they're doing. With regards to the Accountability Committee, they made some legislative recommendations to the General Assembly. That's turned out to be a bill on RTD's operations at the General Assembly. That was introduced on March 4th, I believe, and will have its first hearing later this month. That bill largely focuses on a couple of areas of restrictions that are in our original enabling legislation, and so overall, I think they're helpful. Removals of those restrictions, and will provide flexibility to RTD. The RTD board is going to have an opportunity to weigh in on their support or opposition to the bill on March 23rd, next Tuesday. So that's an opportunity for the board to take their first kind of public comments on that bill. So I think that's certainly something we're tracking. Included in that bill are things like removing the fare box recovery ratio that we currently have in our enabling legislation. There's going to be some new standards also put in there in terms of our financial reporting. So they remove that fare box recovery, but add in a few reporting standards that we do in our annual financial reports. And some of the other things, allows for the removal or the repeal of parking reductions as it relates to developments that RTD considers on transfer facilities. So we think that's a flexible or provides flexibility to the agency to entertain, TOD related development. And lastly, there's some restrictions removed with regards to how RTD can manage its parking lots as well, and again, see that as a operational flexibility for the agency. So that's largely what that bill does. Also, of course, we're tracking at the state level this larger statewide transportation funding bill. A lot of what my understanding is there's not direct funding that would go to RTD out of that bill, but a lot of the focus seems to be out of this new funding, how much can get down to the local level and and potentially be a supporting source of funding that supplements and enhances RTD service with the kind of projects that they're doing there on transportation related projects at the local level. So that's certainly something we're tracking. At the federal level, and that's certainly where we get the bulk of our funding that comes outside of RTD comes through the federal transit grants through FTA. That, excuse me, my phone's ringing back here. So at the federal level, that is something we've been tracking heavily. A lot of the most recent work is around pandemic related relief coming from Congress. And, it's something that through my discussions with congressional leaders, it certainly needs to be a focus that this funding is for relief. It isn't stimulus funding yet. This is to stabilize transit agencies. The most recent bill, President Biden signed this on March 11th, the American Rescue Plan. And that plan, again, provides funding similar to the CARES Act, which was passed last spring and was the first kind of COVID relief bill that provided funding for transit. And then CRISA was the second bill that passed, this fall. And that again provided some relief funding for transit. This most recent bill again provides funding in that same manner, mostly coming through the Formula Grant Program. And it's really intended for operations. That funding will be available for transit agencies, including RTD, on a reimbursable basis. It's not that RTD has this pot of money now. It's that we get to spend the money, go to FTA, say, did we spend this correctly? And they say, yes, we can reimburse you for these operational impacts. And so that's the challenge. So there's, it's certainly a lot of correcting the record that we can use this money for a wide variety of things. It's very specific that it's meant to stabilize, ensure, and maintain operations. And for transit agencies, of course, in our transit planning, we plan these budgets well in advance, and so having that congressional support has been critical for us. So that's something that we've been paying a lot of attention to. I think moving forward at the federal level, the next thing up that Congress has indicated they're moving toward is a large infrastructure bill. And so this will go more toward the stimulus side of things. The last year, the House passed HR 2, the Invest in America Act. That I think is going to be the framework for a lot of the new surface transportation considerations out of Congress. And I think that's a great framework. I was just looking at the numbers out of that bill, and it has a huge increase. Just out of the formula programs alone, it's about a 60% increase in funding for transit specifically. So, when we talk about federal government support on transit, it's largely a good starting point, and we hope Congress moves in that direction. But that'll be something certainly that we'll be working on moving forward here. So yeah, I think that covers most everything. And I see Roger's hand up here if you had a question.
Yeah, Michael, going from the macro to a more micro, to what extent are you going to have interactions with local governments, A, and then B, to what extent can we help you?
Certainly. Well, I think my goal is to have lots of interactions with local governments. I mean, certainly my job is to be the government relations officer for local governments as well. So, I look forward to trying to get to know as many the city councils and the mayors. I think starting with some of the organized groups, Metro Mayors Caucus, Northwest Mayors has got a nice organized group. And, I've had a few opportunities to touch on some of their work and get that opportunity to kind of hear what the issues are and start being able to kind of put a frame around all of the local issues and how I can best provide information or be a point of contact for them for anything that is helpful. That's largely how I see myself interacting with a lot of the local government members. And in terms of how you all can help, I think if anything you can do to flag issues for me, I think is probably the most helpful. Is, I'm certainly feel like I'm trying to learn a lot new, and I'm not from Colorado, so I'm certainly having to lean a little heavier on learning the local and state side of things rather than the federal side. So I would say anything, if you all have suggestions of issues that come up that I can focus on, I think that'd be incredibly helpful to kind of flag for me.
Any other questions from folks?
Yeah, I got one quick question, Michael. I haven't really been, I read the Accountability Committee's report, but I haven't yet looked at the legislation that's working its way through the state legislature. Is there anything in that currently, and these all change, of course, as they go through the process, but that that you think gives RTD any concern?
I don't think there's any major concerns out of that bill so far. Most of everything that's in there, and we work closely with the Accountability Committee in putting together their draft recommendations, and then we also work closely with the authors of the legislation, as well as our union partners, to really try to put together what I think the intent of the legislation is, which is to provide better operational flexibility for RTD. So no major concerns that I'd flag out of that right now.
Okay. And just to follow up a little bit, I suppose, on the previous comment, when you go out and you talk to the local communities, here's a good suggestion that'll get you not to be beloved, I'm sure, but it needs to be done. I think with all the Reimagine work, you really need to start talking with them about how they can really become partners with RTD. And yes, that also means maybe contributing to the cause, which is not going to sell real well, given everybody pays into a big regional sales tax, and a lot of people think they don't get their money's worth as it is. But it seems pretty clear, and we've talked about this in the committee some, that the locals are going to have to step up if they really want service that serves their localities better. Some of the things we talked about earlier at this very meeting. How is that going to happen? And how are they going to partner with RTD and their community members and their business community to really pull that off in this reimagined way? And, to me, I think that's should be, if it isn't part of your job, to start introducing those concepts. No, you don't have the answers. The board hasn't obviously even talked really about what this means, the RTD board. But I think we need to start at least paving the way to those conversations. And it seems to me you're the right person to do that. I mean, look, I served on a city council for a long, long time. I know how these conversations go, but somebody needs to start it somewhere, painful though it may be. So I don't know if you think that's part of your role, if that it's too early to do that. Just curious as to where you think that is.
Yeah, no, I think you summarized something that I certainly have recognized in coming on and trying to, learn all the issues. But no matter what, I think that in order to move forward with whether it be Reimagine, and whether to move forward with whether it's a Northwest Rail discussion, or whether to move forward with any of the large goals and things that RT wants to accomplish, it certainly is going to need to be more of a partnership than we currently have. I'm still trying to figure out this answer in terms of how many states don't contribute to transit, It's not very many, and Colorado seems to be one of very few, maybe one of 15 in the country that doesn't have a good dedicated source that goes to transit. I think that it's going to be too difficult for the federal government to say we're going to be able to lean on them to provide all the resources for all that the agency wants to accomplish. And as you said, a lot of the rhetoric and the goals that I hear out of the community, whether it be environmental benefits, whether it be, how do I increase multimodalism and first last mile, how do I create equity? I think all of those things get accomplished with transit. And so, in recognizing that, I certainly acknowledge the point you're making and do see it as part of my role to try to organize communications and a strategic plan behind accomplishing these things that our board sets and says, yes, move forward and accomplish this.
Others have any questions for Michael? He definitely jumped in at a time when there was lots of issues going on.
Yes, definitely. Well, look forward to meeting you all in person, hopefully one of these days. And please, I'll put my contact information in the chat. And if I can be helpful on any matter, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks very much for joining. Certainly we will have you back. This whole concept of partnerships, not just the legislative issues, but the partnerships with the local communities, I think is going to be a big one for this group. So chatting with you about it, I have no doubt we'll want to do that again. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity and the time.
All right. Well, we've lost a few people, as we often do, but with the time that's left, what I think we were planning on doing, and we can do this pretty quickly, is just trying to get a sense about, well, what other items you think should be on our agendas over the next few months. We can't look too far ahead, but at least the next few months. And secondly, in terms of meeting expectations, and we could certainly use this meeting as an example, did it work pretty well? Are we getting the chance to both learn about what's going on in RTD, getting ourselves up to speed, but also providing feedback that we think is being taken into consideration? So if anybody's got any comments on either of those two, that would be great.
Sorry. I was just going to also add, this is a discussion that Joanna and Joe had started also, and had a little, are these meetings meeting your expectations, as Matt said? And then should we as a committee, should you as a committee be thinking about, or should we be asking, what of a presenter, of someone that has asked to come and present like the Reimagine, is there something important here that we should advise the board on? Are you looking for the committee to come, comment or report to the board? Are you looking for input or a recommendation? So those are some ideas that Joanna and Joe had come up with, was, so that both the presentation is interesting and important and timely to the committee, but also that the agency is looking for advice on something, and just to always be framing our discussion with whoever is presenting kind of in light of those questions. So I don't want to interrupt any others, but I just wanted to throw those. I had those notes in my here from that discussion with Joanna and Joe. I wanted to just pose that for you all to think about and talk about. The silence is deafening.
Yeah, come on, guys. This type of conversation would obviously be way easier in person, been, again, this virtual stuff. It's always difficult to just have a chat virtually.
Yeah, Andrea has got to raise her hand.
All right, good.
I'm wondering if we should have, I don't know if I want to call it a presentation, but any kind of transportation legislation that's in front of the state legislature right now, like the RTD bill, and where they're going, what kind of support do they have, opposition, that kind of a thing.
Okay. And I did put in the chat, people, there is going to be a special board meeting coming up this Tuesday that is scheduled specifically around talking about the RTD bill and some of the provisions that the accountability committee is considering and making recommendations on. So if anyone's interested in listening into that, it's now, you can follow the link when the agenda is sent out. Danny?
I have learned a lot from all of the presentations during these meetings. I really enjoy the kinds of conversations that we had today that benefits from all of the different experiences that we've had, all the different sectors that we have really worked in, some people in energy or environment and transportation infrastructure, or like me focusing on social dynamics and quality of life. And I love seeing that all come together. And I just want that to continue and try to bring that out. And any presentation or discussion is making sure that everyone can possibly see their way to be engaged in it. I mean, there have been some, I say that because there have been some presentations where I'm learning from nothing and it's still fascinating, and I might not contribute very much that time. I like it though when there are these things that really many of us can bring these different perspectives to bear. I like that a lot.
Dawn, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, I agree with Danny. I like the whole brainstorming kind of element of it, and just kind of the power of the whole and everybody's diverse perspective kind of, chiming in about the breadth of issues that are in front of RTD. One thing that comes to mind is with the pandemic, the, introduction of, like how we know, like right now, where we can see transportation is going to go with driverless vehicles, probably an increase of services like Lyft and Lime and all that. I feel like innovation is super important, especially with our continued financial constraints, which is just always the bane of transit, right? I don't know if there's something that we could add when there's room on the agenda where we just kind of be like, hey, anybody see something, there's all these different fields that people are interested in, they're relevant to transit, what is the coolest, most innovative thing that you've seen another transit system do that helps with equity, that helps with sustainability or whatever, and just have people just give a 5-minute pitch and see. As we brainstorm, is this the sort of thing that we could implement or maybe kind of encourage it being implemented in RTD? Some of these things really aren't not about cost, right? They're about being strategic and leveraging things that we already have. It's just a thought, because I do really like the brainstorming thing, and I really do appreciate the diverse perspectives represented here.
Is there any other, I don't know, kind of background information people would like to learn about? I mean, there's a number of newer people on the board, and frankly, even those of us who've been around, we're hardly experts on RTD. We might know about one little aspect of it, but is there anything else people think would be helpful, especially as Reimagine keeps rolling along, that would help us understand better what the trade-offs are, or what the finances are, or what the current service is like, or pick your, I'm just making these up, obviously. Because we could get somebody from RTD, or we could actually get somebody from outside of RTD potentially to come and talk to us and give us some perspective about how the agency works, or about how even other agencies work, if that would be helpful.
I'm interested in the financial aspects because I feel like they're, it's just a heavy weight that every agency has to bear. And with the pandemic, I mean, I feel bad. I feel bad for the accountants that look at these sheets every day. But I would be interested in that, maybe not immediately, but like when they have a better picture.
I would too. It's an area that when this comes up, I just kind of accept it because I have no idea. You know, I'm not going to question anything tied to that. Outside of that, I would say I personally, I you know, researched RTD in different ways when I was interested in joining this group, but I also don't want to know too many things so that my ideas I feel more innovative when I'm not constrained by what people think is like, it's just that way, or it has to be this way. I think some of the things that I hear and some of the things that I share come from a place of not knowing everything. So I'm not inhibited by what has been, and I just think of what would be good. And my comment about the trains today, my question about those like steep steps, and I don't know if we can change those trains, but I'm going to mention that kind of thing. And I don't know if I would have if somebody before, when I started this, if they start out by saying, okay, first things first, we can't change the trains. Nobody said that, so I'm going to bring it up, if that makes sense. But the financial piece, I think that would, I do think that would help me as well.
Anybody else? Well, I've got one other question. Well, Andrea, you have your hand up again.
I'm not sure how long ago, 5 or 6 years ago, Dr. Mack had a presentation by, I think it was Seattle, that has the ORCA system, a way that the less affluent people could actually use the system without being embarrassed by what their cards said on them. They had special cards, but how they actually made it affordable for everyone. And I'm trying to think of who is the other system that went free. Their transit system is free. I would love to. Is it Baltimore?
Yeah,
I just had
so.
read a.
Maybe not.
But it would be so nice to hear from systems how they actually accomplished what they did.
Yeah, they probably have state support, which was noted. Colorado is not too hot on that concept. We don't do that, right? We don't fund things very well here. I just have one more question, and we don't really have to answer it right now, but it's important for us to figure it out, which is, I mean, I thought today's conversation was great, and I love when things become more like a conversation than just, you know, person A says something, person B says something, person C says something, and that's great, but you're not really talking to each other. That is also much easier to do in person and much harder to do in these little disembodied rectangles. But I'm just curious about how you think we would best do that, because it's pretty clear, certainly with Reimagine, we're going to have a deeper, longer conversation at some point about not just tossing questions out to the consultants, that's important, but what are our priorities? What would we like to see? How are we going to deal with these many trade-offs? So how do we go about having that conversation among ourselves? And I see Roger saying we're going to be splitting into breakout rooms in April to have some smaller group discussions, which, yeah, we'll do. That works up to a point, frankly. It's always hard to then have the different groups really reintegrate themselves because each one is off in its own little universe, which is great. I've done this, obviously. Most of you have too. And then it can be very difficult sometimes to really reintegrate conversations that are very different among the differing groups. So, while we're virtual, that's probably the best we can do. But think about, how do you want to make that work?
Michael, I see your hands up too.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I just wanted to, I see that Dawn dropped in the note on Kansas City as the Fare Free pilot that they've got going on. I just wanted to note there's, last year there was, on that same topic of Fare Free, there was a bill introduced by Senator Markey of Massachusetts and Ayanna Pressley called the Freedom to Ride Act. And it actually provided $5 billion in pilot money to basically supplant what you would collect on your fares. So it really, and that is probably what transit agencies need in order to pilot and experiment with anything in that concept. They just need to have those the fare box recovery completely supplanted, and so that's what that bill does. So just to note, it hasn't been reintroduced, but just to put it on your radar that there's some federal concepts out there that focus on that.
Well, and didn't Longmont do that for a while? They had a year where they were free, and then they instituted fares.
They did. They did some subsidies, the city and the county. I don't think ridership in Longmont's very high. This is the usual chicken and egg again about you don't have very many routes, you don't have very much service, you don't have very many riders. Therefore, you get the picture. But Longmont also has land use issues, to put it mildly, that make transit, as in many areas of the metro area, kind of difficult. Not blaming Longmont, it's it's just where we are, but it sure doesn't make it easy to make transit work real well. So, okay, well, think about all of that. We don't have to answer it right this minute, obviously. We can talk about it again some next time, or you can send some ideas into Roger about, both other topics you'd like to hear about, as well as how we might have better conversations, and also how we might get our ideas to the board a little more effectively, perhaps. So all of that's up for conversation at future meetings, and definitely feel free to use Roger as kind of the place where conversations can be had and ideas can be sent, and Roger will let all of us know. And Roger, I assume some of the stuff in the chat, some of these links, I assume you'll collect and put in an email to us so we can go after them later.
A lot of good information shared today.
Yeah. Anything else from anybody? Any other thoughts or comments?
So as Matt mentioned, and I put in the chat, just a reminder, we are inviting board members to join us next month, and we'll be we may have a common presentation. I'm not sure yet. The co-chairs will look at what requests come in, but we'll spend most of the time doing some small breakout rooms just to get to know new board members, get to know each other a little bit better, and just have an unstructured dialogue. So we won't be necessarily, we'll just allow an opportunity for folks to have a conversation as best as we can, given that, yes, it's still virtual.
And one of the things I suggested to Roger, this is probably still a little bit away, is, look, I don't know when we're going to be able to meet in person again. That's really up to RTD when they decide that they are allowing meetings in person. It's too early right now. But when the weather's nice, sometime, I don't know, May, June timeframe, maybe we get together doors just for a little get together and a way to chat. No real structure to it, but we could pair off. We could talk to each other like in person. What a concept! And I'm sorry, maybe it's because I'm old, but nothing really replaces that in terms of getting to know people. Not necessarily trying to solve problems, but just literally getting to know each other. So we'll kind of keep that in mind, and we'll see if people are interested. When the weather's nice and we can find a place to maybe just chat with one another and have a beer.
Like speed dating.
Roger will provide the beer.
Absolutely. We have to do it off RTD property.
Well, yeah, it would be off our property for sure. Okay, anything?
I have nothing else.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, everybody. It was a great meeting. Appreciate all your comments and thoughts.
All right, have a good day, good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, see you next month.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.